Hi there. Today we are going to finish James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl. When we left off yesterday, we were on chapter 38, and they had landed on top of the Empire State Building on the point of that, and the police and fire department had come, and James was able to talk to them and tell them that he was that they were nice people, insects, and he was a nice boy, and now they're working on getting them down. So we're going to finish up today the book James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl. Chapter 38. 5 minutes later, they were all safely down, and James was excitedly telling his story to a group of flabbergasted officials. And suddenly, everyone who had come over on the Peach was a hero. They were all escorted to the steps of City Hall, where the mayor of New York made a speech of welcome. And while he was doing this, 100 steeplejacks, armed with ropes and ladders and pulleys, swarmed up to the top of the Empire State Building and lifted the Giant Peach off the spike and lowered it to the ground. Then the mayor shouted, "We must now have a ticker-tape parade for our wonderful visitors." And so a procession was formed, and the leading car, which was an enormous open limousine, sat James and all of his friends. Next came the Giant Peach itself. Men with cranes and hooks had quickly hoisted it onto a very large truck, and there it now sat, looking just as huge and proud and brave as ever. There was, of course, a bit of a hole in the bottom of it, where the spike of the Empire State Building had gone in, but who cared about that? Or indeed about the peach juice that was dripping out and onto the street. Behind the Peach, skidding about all over the place in the peach juice, came the mayor's limousine, and behind the mayor's limousine came about 20 or other limousines carrying all the important people of the city. And the crowds went wild with excitement. They leaned out of the windows of the skyscrapers, cheering and yelling and screaming and clapping and throwing out bits of white paper and ticker tape, and James and his friends stood up in their car and they waved back at them when they went by. And then a rather curious thing happened. The procession was moving slowly along Fifth Avenue, and suddenly a little girl in a red dress ran out from the crowd, and she shouted, "Oh, James, James, could I please have just a tiny taste of your marvelous peach?" "Help yourself," James shouted back. "Eat all you want. It won't keep forever anyway." No sooner had he said this than about 50 other children exploded out of the crowd, and they came running onto the street. "Can we have some too?" they cried. "Well, of course you can," James answered. "Everyone can have some." The children jumped on the back, and they swarmed like ants all over the Giant Peach, eating and eating to their heart's content. And the news of what was happening spread quickly from street to street, and more boys and more girls came running in all directions to join the feast, and soon there was a trail of children a mile long, chasing after the peach as it proceeded slowly up Fifth Avenue. Really, it was a fantastic sight. To some people, it looked as though the Pied Piper of Hamelin had suddenly descended upon New York. And to James, who had never dreamed there could be so many children as this in the world, was the most marvelous thing he had ever seen happen. By the time the procession was over, the whole gigantic fruit had been completely eaten up, and only the big brown stone in the middle, licked clean and shiny by 10,000 eager little tongues, was left standing on the truck. And thus the journey ended, but the travelers lived on. Every one of them became rich and successful in their new country. The centipede was made vice president in charge of sales of a high-class firm of boot and shoe manufacturers. The earthworm, with his lovely pink skin, was employed by a company that made women's face creams to speak on commercials on television. The silkworm and Miss Spider, after they both had been taught to make nylon thread instead of silk, set up a factory together, and they made ropes for tightrope walkers. The glowworm became the light inside of the torch of the Statue of Liberty, and thus saved a grateful city from having to pay a huge electricity bill every year. The old green grasshopper became a member of the New York Symphony Orchestra, where his playing was greatly admired. The ladybug, who had been haunted all of her life by fear that her house was on fire and that her children were all gone, married the head of the fire department, and she lived happily ever after. And as for the enormous peach stone, it was set up as a permanently in the place of honor in the Central Park, and it became a famous monument. But it was not only a famous monument, it was also a famous house. And inside the famous house lived a very famous person, James Henry Trotter himself. And all you had to do on any day of the week was go up and knock on the door, and the door would always be open to you. And you would always be asked to come inside and see the famous room where James had first met his friends. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you would find the old green grasshopper in there as well, resting peacefully in a chair before the fire, or perhaps it would be the ladybug who had dropped by for a cup of tea and some gossip, or the centipede to show off a batch of new, particularly elegant boots that he had just acquired. Every day of the week, hundreds and hundreds of children from far and near came pouring into the city to see the marvelous peach stone in the park. And James Henry Trotter, who once, if you remember, had been the saddest and the loneliest little boy that you could find, now had all the friends and playmates in the world. And because of so many of them were always begging him to tell again and again the story of his adventures on a peach, he thought that it would be nice one day if he sat down and he wrote a book. And so he did. And that's what you have just finished reading. And that's the end of James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl.